Gamers, gals, non-binary pals, it's Stevie here with a piece of actually original content, and it's an in-depth deck profile for my absolutely favorite deck, being Labyrinth, which I have been playing for about just under a year now, where the format of this video is ultimately just stolen from MBT. Though at this point, what haven't I stolen from this guy? And before we begin, I just want to shout out two things specifically. One is without a doubt Ryan Yu, where this deck was heavily modeled after. His deck profile will be linked in the description down below for a more basic overview of the cards, but I feel like it doesn't go too deep into the reasons why Labyrinth had a good position in the current format, as well as some of the cool things that you can do with the deck. And second is the Bay Area Yu-Gi-Oh community. Through lots of testing and games and tech testing, I've managed to do pretty well at non-OTS locals, you hear that Konami, and other events. So shoutouts to Game Parlor, shoutouts to 88 Card House, as well as the boys in the group chat. So why Labyrinth? For most of my Yu-Gi-Oh career, I've always liked pretty linear decks. I like having decks that have one primary game plan and you lose not due to you choking a combo and losing out on a random +1 that could have contributed to the board, and you lose on a negate and then you just get super pissy at yourself, but decks whose basic game plan is laid out and pretty simple and your decisions are on a more macro level. Think of, do I want immediate impact or do I want to search follow-up type decisions? And I feel that the best deck in the format currently being Rescuays, Infernoble, Unchained, Pearly, Vanadium, and Labyrinth, that being the best 6 decks in my opinion, I feel that Labyrinth fits my playstyle the best. I also personally feel that my runs with this deck have been decidedly the best Yu-Gi-Oh I've played throughout my career. I'm not winning YCSs or anything for obvious reasons, but recently I have been, just crushing 3v3s, case tournaments, and online events, which are pretty fun. And these are non-OTS, Konami, please don't lock me up again. So before we start, I'm going to tell you guys two things. One, I am not a fan of Unchained Lab and I think it's bad. And two, we are not main decking Floodgates. And you may be asking yourself, oh, I thought Unchained Lab saw a bunch of competitive success. I thought that Floodgates are really good in Labyrinth. Well, let's tackle these problems one at a time, starting with Unchained. So Unchained Labyrinth is a deck, in my opinion, takes two decks that are completely fine independently from each other and gives them each other's weaknesses. Labyrinth is a deck that doesn't exactly hard lose to hand traps like Nibiru or Imperm, but going through the Yama line or the Ariani line, respectively, heavily opens you up to this vulnerability. Like, Ariani is the biggest Imperm magnet on planet Earth. You will not win if that happens. And secondly, you have to play a lot of bricks in the deck that don't exactly synergize well with each other perfectly. Hard opening Escape is useless outside of a discard outlet if you can't get to Yama. Shavara is just a one of that if you hard open, your Yama line is basically completely useless. The fact that Labyrinth already has a couple of cards you don't exactly want to hard open makes this version of Labyrinth brick exponentially more alongside the Labyrinth soft and hard garnets. And regarding Floodgates, cards like Skill Drain and Summon Limit you can argue affect your opponent more than they hurt you, and I 100% agree. I too was a Floodgate enjoyer. If anyone wants to buy my Skill Drain Ultimate Rares, if anyone wants to buy my Ulti Skill Drains or QCR Summon Limits, please hit me up in the DMs. I lost all my money playing poker. However, as funny as it is to say, Labyrinth, in my opinion, isn't exactly a control deck. It's a combo deck that aims to make it to turn 3 to infinitely recycle tempo cards and hand loop your opponent and eventually just beat them to death in a single turn, similar to Salamangre in a way. While Skill Drain and Summon Limit can stick around, your opponent can pretty easily just summon monsters that can test yours. Decks like Tier Limit can make 3k beaters to crash with your lady, Vanadium can make Astral Out and Dissipator, Druid Worm now beats Lady since she can be targeted while you're under Skill Drain. That, coupled with the fact that your turn 3s are much weaker now due to you being unable to reset off of Lovely, you can't Lady, just grab more trap cards, your Arianas are essentially entirely offline, coupled with the fact that you can essentially no longer OTK, makes, in my opinion, Floodgates not the perfect choice for the main deck. Keyword main deck. Time for the meat and potatoes. Let's get into the card by card. This is going into it assuming you have a pretty decent understanding of what the Labyrinth cards do in essence, like Lovely Lab reset stuff or Ariani is a searcher, but I'm just going to go a little bit more in depth for things to keep in mind regarding how to best utilize their effects, as well as what you should be aiming to use these monsters for. So let's start with Lovely Labyrinth. You only ever need one because she is the hardest brick in the deck by a country mile, and she can't summon herself, so if you hard draw her, you're going to pitch her off a furniture and pray your opponent didn't open a Bestial or DD Crow. Her first effect insulates your back row from established boards and hand traps, so holding cards for the literal perfect moment, or when your opponent has already committed to a very resource intensive play while you have something like DaRuMa in the back row, is extremely profitable. She can also reset normal traps from your graveyard, so in games where you have silver bullets available, such as IDP versus Unchained or Dimensional Barrier versus Pearly, having Lovely infinitely loop these cards is mission critical in how you win these matches. And her buff effect is non-targeting and can hand loop. The amount of evenly matches and Harpy's Feather Dusters I've sniped out of hands is unethical. One thing to keep in mind is that if you plan on using Eradicator is to chainlink one Lovely to pop after triggering the pop effect, such as off a big welcome, and going chainlink to Eradicator calling spell. Because if you structure the chain in that way, your Lovely Lab won't snipe a spell if you call spell, since, you know, they won't have any more spells in hand. We are playing 2 Lady Labyrinth of the Silver Castle. She's kind of a brick and extremely searchable. She summons herself for free, and in response to a trap card being activated like a Paleo, she can set any normal trap from deck, which makes turn 1 trap tutoring insanely busted. Essentially just use her to search out your silver bullets, and if you already have everything, search out more engine. Can't go wrong with just killing your opponent. It may be pretty obvious based on how much Labyrinth engine we're running, but the current build of Labyrinth is built around these 3 to 4 card combos of just triggering Lovely and Lady turn 1 and being able to hand loop once or twice, alongside tutoring any trap, is just absolutely disgusting and forms an incredible gameplay loop that I think is the core essential gameplay plan of this deck. Next up, we've got 3 Ariana. She's your one and only normal summon and searches any lab card. Insanely broken down a big welcome, Labyrinth is essentially a 1 card plus 3 or more. Additionally, if a monster leaves the board by your normal trap effect, if you haven't used her search effect that turn, you can draw a card and just special any fiend or set any spell or trap. We're playing 3 Arias now. I had mixed feelings about her inclusion at the start. I felt that she was kind of bricky since she doesn't really do anything on her own and required other cards to combo with, and you needed to build your deck in an extremely specific way by just loading it with a bunch of like Saki traps. But in this build, you are maxing out on everything, and you're almost always going to open a way to utilize her. As a quick effect, she sends herself from the hand or field to the graveyard, and you can either set from hand to field any normal trap that can be activated this turn. So if you open Arias and DaRuMa going second, you're truly just the better player, and if your opponent activates a card or effect in response to a Labyrinth effect or normal trap while she's in the graveyard, like a Paleo, she can just revive herself. This is great in turn 3 and beyond scenarios where, say, an Ariana gets impermed. You can bring Arias back and either go into a Link 2 like Dark or Muckracker, or just make Chaos Angel, because who would have guessed that 4 plus 6 equals 10. We are playing 3 each of Chandelier and Stevie. You can send them from the hand or field to the graveyard alongside a discard to set a Labyrinth spell or trap from your deck. You may be thinking that these cards are essentially just neg 1s, and while they are, and your turn 1 is a little bit less impactful, where instead you could have just set 4 power traps and just said fuck it, we ball. Labyrinth does need the consistency and ability to go into the grind game in order to survive turn 3s and beyond, and while you do give up a bit of presence going first with the furniture, they open an incredible booklet of just follow-up plays that essentially tell your opponent, you better kill me soon or I'm going to start the infinite trap generator machine. Additionally, if a monster leaves the field by your normal trap effect while they're in the graveyard, by the way, it doesn't have to be your opponent, so keep that in mind. Chandelier can add itself to hand, while Torby can special summon itself. Fun fact, 2 plus 8 equals 10, so have fun making Chaos Angel off of Lovely or Lady. And last for the monsters, we've got triple Ku-Klok. So Clock suffers an issue that Arias has in the sense where it doesn't really do anything on its own, but in combination with other cards, it becomes absolutely heinous. You can discard it to activate a trap card the turn it's set, as long as you control a Labyrinth monster, and note, that means any trap card, so you know, the card you set off of Lady is activatable, and if it's already engraved and a card is sent from the hand to the graveyard to activate a Labyrinth card effect or normal trap card, you can either revive it or add it back to the hand. So fun little combo. If you open Furniture plus Ku-Klok plus a discard, you can Ku-Klok on an empty board, then on a new chain, go Furniture, discard itself, and you know, any other blank card to set a welcome. Then the Ku-Klok will revive itself because the Furniture sent itself in order to activate a Labyrinth effect. and then that gives you the monster you need to activate either your big or small welcome. And the fact that these are quick effects mean that you can do this on your opponent's turn as well, which is absolutely hilarious. Once versus a sprite opponent, after they normal summoned the blue, I did the aforementioned play and just summoned Lovely Labyrinth off the big welcome and just popped their normal summon, and they just passed, and I killed them on the following turn because this deck is broken. Next, we've got one copy of Labyrinth. This card was essentially non-essential prior, due to it having a poor matchup spread and it sort of being seen as this sort of win more card. But since you're playing so many furnishers and welcome, having a card that essentially gives you additional layers of interruption by giving your welcomes the ability to non-targeting pop is incredible in the current format, in my opinion, especially against decks like Pearly and Rescue Ace. Two things to keep in mind, by the way. One, the effect for Labyrinth to pop a card on the activation of a welcome trap is applied to the trap itself. It's not the field spell activating, it just gives the trap card that effect. And two, Lovely Labyrinth can trigger off a small welcomes pop given it to it by a Lab. The revive effect is cute as well, being able to bring back things like Ariana for more pluses or destroy Lovelies and Ladies to build a board. The best way to look at this card is as a second Lovely Lab, because if your first one gets Fenrir'd or Bestialed, this is basically the only way you're going to be able to clean up gummy board states, because most of your removal is entirely centralized in Big Welcome Labyrinth, which isn't infinite, Labyrinth, which is kind of infinite, and Lovely Labyrinth. And if you lose access to one of these pieces, mainly just the Lovely Labyrinth, you're going to be in a pretty back foot position. So this is just good insurance to play inside your deck. And finally, we're playing 3 big welcomes and 3 small welcomes. Rule of cool: get access to big welcome as soon as humanly possible. And if you've already got big welcomes in rotation, that's when you could start going for small welcomes. Big Welcome basically just does everything for the deck. It lets you dodge interruption and removal. The bounce can return any card, so have fun bouncing set hand traps and Nibiru's. The bounce triggers the leave the field by normal trap clause of your Labyrinth cards. The graveyard effect can either be removal or a way to dodge imperms, and you could like re-trigger your like furniture engrave. It just does everything. This card might actually be the best engine trap card of all time. Small Welcome is unfortunately a little bit weaker, being only able to special from the deck as well as fiend locking you, but we have to max out on it because we want to be able to combo with Arias and Kuklok as much as humanly possible. Additionally, if a monster leaves the field by normal trap effect, it can reset itself outside of the turn it was sent to the graveyard. So fun little fact, if you have a second Welcome Labyrinth in grave not set that turn, you can reset that specific copy even if you already use an on-field Welcome Labyrinth this turn. An example is if you have Lab on the board, a set small welcome, and another small welcome in the graveyard. The onboard small welcome can pop a monster thanks to the Lab, and on the new chain, you can reset the old small welcome to the board and set up this pseudo infinite pop machine. Next, we're playing 3 Pot of Greed. It's Pot of Greed, and you play this over Prosperity since furniture combo is so resource intensive that you really do need the extra card, as well as the fact that you can get away with playing multiple copies of these cards in your extra deck anyways. Hand traps, we've got 3 Ash, 3 Nibiru, and 3 Imperm. Ash Blossom is just generically broken this format. It basically hits every single deck in some capacity. Nibiru is a bit more of a silver bullet, but it helps you play into certain combo decks and bad matchups, such as Infernoble and Unchained. Fun fact, if you chainlink 1 Nibiru and chainlink 2 a furniture to send the Nibiru from hand to graveyard, the Nibiru will still wipe the board, and your opponent will get the token, so no Link Spider into SP shenanigans. And Imperm is just generically good, as well as the fact that, you know, it's a normal trap, so if you imperm something, you can special Lady. And finally, for the non-engine, we've got 1 Call by the Grave. If there's one card this deck gets absolutely ruined by, it is Ash Blossom. Ash on your welcomes is crippling. It can often just be the sole reason you lose certain matchups or games or fucking everything you've ever loved dear. It's also got generic application versus certain other decks and cards such as Vanadium Meek or Unchained monsters trying to summon after they get popped. So the only 2 sack traps we play are DaRuMa Cannon and Ice Dragon's Prison. I thought it was kind of curious that we were only playing 2 because some decks are playing 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe just like 5 additional sack traps plus like a playset of DaRuMa to combo with Arias. But for the most part, your engine kind of just takes care of everything, and you don't need to fully stun lock your opponent in order to win. You can just crack their board on the follow-up because Lovely and Lady are just so big. you can just go battle phase, you have pops off the Lab, you have the bounce off the Big Welcome. You don't need to always 100% just stun your opponent. It's okay to go to a turn 3, 4, 5 because you should never be losing this matchup. So DaRuMa Cannon is necessary versus a lot of matchups, as well as the fact that it forces players to send their unaffected monsters such as the X-Pearly Noir or Link monsters, which is really great because holy shit, there is so much SP Little Knight running around. A lot of decks need their normal summon or specific monsters face up on the board, think Fenrir or every Pearly card ever, in order to play, and a well-timed DaRuMa Cannon can just end the game on the spot. And Ice Dragon's Prison is a bit more narrow in its application. You're not going to get much use out of this versus say Vanquish Soul or Sprite, but it's the only way this deck can realistically beat Unchained and Tearlament. It's also pretty solid versus Rescue Ace, and funnily enough in the mirror, because if you IDP their Lovely Lab, you are absolutely golden. Now, onto the side deck. 3 Druid Worm is in here for a Dragon Link, Unchained, and the Mirror Match. It's especially good versus Unchained due to it essentially just being able to out 2 pieces of interruption at minimum, and versus Labyrinth, guess what? A Druid Worm, target Lovely Lab, GG. Next, we have 3 Droll and Lockbird. It's unfortunately a mainstay in side decks going second versus combo decks like Vanadium, and even certain mid-range decks like Vanquish Soul and Infernoble. This is kind of just a card that you have to put in sometimes in order to just stay alive and minimize how big your opponent's board can get. And finally, 3 Effect Veiler rounds out our hand trap lineup. It's Veiler, what do you want me to say? Put this in versus combo, bad chest. We've got 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster in here because it's a blowout versus Rescue Ace and in the mirror match. And then we've got triple anti-spell Fragrance. This is the floodgate of choice I decided to play for this deck. Anti-spell does not hurt us at all since our furniture sets from the deck anyways, so our Lab doesn't have any confliction, as well as the fact that the only other spells we're playing are Pot and Call by the Grave, and if we're not activating these things as soon as humanly possible, we've done something extremely wrong. It's just an amazingly solid card that will never conflict with us, and I think is probably the best floodgate to be siding overall. And the last 2 cards are just more sack traps. We've got D-Barrier in order to give Tearlament and Pearly a run for their money, and Eradicator is here if you want to be an asshole. So the extra deck is pretty simple as well, but it is very expensive as a forewarning. This whole deck can probably cost you, for the main inside, you know, about $200. This extra deck will cost you about $500 to $700. So please borrow the cards or play online before you decide to invest in Labyrinth. This extra deck can get extremely expensive. We're playing 3 Chaos Angel since it is extremely easy to make with your big mommies plus a Stovey or an Ariana plus Arius / Druid Worm. Fun fact, this card's banish isn't actually once per turn, so you could technically infinitely loop it with Muckracker, which is very funny. It's also a level 8 or higher fiend, so it makes your big welcome engrave online as well to bounce your opponent's stuff. We've got 2 Tyon Sky Crisis. It's a fiend, so the small welcome lock will never really affect you. It's spot removal, it's skill drain. It can be bounced back to your own extra deck to turn on your Labyrinth effects, such as the furniture, and turn back on Lady Labyrinth's effect, which is funny because it's 3,000 attack points, and therefore is technically a nombo, but this card is just extremely solid and extremely good, just as important as Chaos Angel. You only ever need 2 in my opinion, because I highly doubt you will ever need a 3rd one in the same way, where Chaos Angel is actually a card that you might cycle twice or even thrice in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! If a match lasts that long. We're playing 2 Dark the Dark Charmer, incredibly broken. Your whole deck is dark, and you could just make SP Little Knight by just grabbing something out of your opponent's graveyard. You can also crash it in order to search your Chandelier or Coup Clock, which is incredibly funny because these guys have less than 1500 defense and are dark. We're playing 3 Muckracker of the Underworld. You're playing a Fiend deck. Just play Monster Reborn. It's broken. One of the neat things about her is the fact that you can recur Lovely Labyrinth very, very easily if you don't have access to Big Welcome or Labyrinth. So in turn 3, 4, or 5, one of your main priorities is, if you're sort of behind, you should try and be getting access to your Lovely Labyrinth in grave back as soon as possible if it ends up there with your Muckracker. So do your best to grab her out of the graveyard. Underworld Goddess is in here because I don't like losing to random bullshit. And finally, we have the SP Little Knight package. We're playing 1 Relinquished Anima because we play Coup Clock and we can suck up a boy before going into SP for the double removal special. And we're playing Clara and Rushka in order to turn a non-Coup Clocked normal summon into an extra deck body in main phase 2 in order to help clear out our opponent's board by turning the SP live. And then of course, we have SP Little Knight. I don't think you need me to tell you how broken this card is. Ultimately, I think Labyrinth is a great pick for the current format, even though it may not seem like it has a lot of depth at first. It's got the ability to turn into a combo deck on later turns, it can reasonably play through board breakers that most trap decks just kinda can't, and I want to sniff the fuck out of Lady Labyrinth's. I think that the deck is a genuine top tier threat, even if the results may not show it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on Labyrinth in the comment section down below. If you like this sort of deck profile type video where I go insanely deep into a deck I actually love, and if I ever decide to swap decks, I will be sure to do another deck profile like this. And yeah, that's about it. See you in the next video. Oh, by the way, merch is live. Please buy merch. I lost all my money on